Private, the bottom of everything. You are 18 years old and you have never been this cold in your life. Not the cold of a winter morning back home in Yorkshire, where you could pull a blanket tighter and wait for the kettle. This cold has no remedy. It lives inside the trench walls, in the water pooled 6 inches deep along the duckboards, in the uniform that has not been fully dry in 11 days. You stopped trying to dry it on the 9th day. The older men said you would. You enlisted in August 1914. There was a brass band outside the town hall. Men were shaking hands with strangers. Someone's mother was crying, but proudly, the way people cry when they believe the sacrifice means something. The recruiting sergeant had a firm handshake and told you it would be over by Christmas. It is now February 1915. You are in a trench outside Ypres, Belgium, and Christmas came and went without anyone informing the war. Private, the lowest rank in the British Army. It means you do what you are told by every man above you, which is every man. You carry the rifle, the bayonet, the entrenching tool, the gas mask, 2 days of rations, the ground sheet, and the ammunition pouches. Together it weighs close to 60 pounds. Nobody asked if you could manage it. You manage it. Your section has 10 men. Corporal Holt runs it. He is 23, has been here since October, and has a way of reading incoming shells by their pitch alone. He knows whether they will land close or carry over. You are still learning. You watch him the way you once watched your father work, looking for the knowledge underneath the action, the kind that cannot be taught directly. Your day begins before dawn. Stand to. Every man on the fire step, rifle ready, eyes fixed on the grey nothing of no man's land. Because dawn is when attacks happen. Stand to lasts until full light. Then stand down. Breakfast. Cold bully beef and bread that has collected more mud than flour on its 2-mile journey from the field kitchen. You eat it. You have stopped tasting food. After breakfast, you repair the parapet. The sandbags are always collapsing. The revetments always rotting. Mud pushes the walls inward, and if you don't push back, the trench becomes a ditch, becomes a grave. This is your morning, every morning. At night, you have been out on patrol twice. The first time, 30 meters through wire and shell craters, in complete darkness, moving so slowly your own breathing felt like noise. No contact. A normal night. Holt told you afterward. The second time was different. You do not talk about the second time. What nobody told you before you came here is that the war is not constant fighting. It is mostly waiting. Waiting for your shift to end. Waiting for the rations. Waiting for the rotation back to reserve. Waiting without knowing exactly what you are waiting for. The waiting has its own weight, and you carry it the same way you carry everything else. You are a private. The war is enormous, and you are very small inside it. But you are here. You are still here. Lance Corporal, 1 stripe, no flaw. You have been given 1 stripe and a problem. The problem is that you are no longer one of the men, but not yet one of the commanders, and the space in between has no solid ground. The men you shared a dugout with last month address you differently now. Not coldly, just differently. A distance has opened that nobody created deliberately and nobody can close. You didn't ask for the stripe. Sergeant Waverley handed it to you 3 weeks ago after the previous Lance Corporal was evacuated with shell fragments in his leg. That was that. No ceremony. 1 stripe, 4 men, and a set of responsibilities that came with no instruction. Lance Corporal, the lowest non-commissioned rank. Instructions come down from above, results are expected from below, and you are the wire connecting both. When something goes wrong in either direction, you feel it first. You're 4 men. 1 who hasn't slept properly in 6 days and hasn't said so. 1 who quotes scripture under heavy bombardment, not from fear, but from habit, the way some men whistle. 1 who has been here 9 months and whose silence is not peace, but what comes after you have accepted every bad possibility. And 1 who is 16, who lied at the recruiting office and whose hands still shake slightly every morning at stand 2, though they have stopped shaking by breakfast. Tonight, you lead a wiring party. 4 men, 2 hours, no man's land. The wire destroyed by the last barrage needs replacing before dawn. You know how to move low and slow, how to freeze the instant a flare goes up and hold that freeze until the darkness returns, how to work barbed wire in complete blackness without making the sound that carries. You learned it by doing it. By making exactly one mistake you have not made again. You go out at 11. Overcast sky, no moon. Good. 2 hours later, you are back. Wire replaced. No contact. One man has a gash on his forearm from a loose barb in the dark. You clean it yourself before reporting to the corporal. Job done. Nothing is recorded. The wire you fixed tonight will be destroyed by the next barrage, and some other lance corporal will fix it again. And that will also go unrecorded. This is not a war of monuments. It is a war of maintenance. 1 stripe, the wire is back up. That is enough for tonight. Corporal, the section is your world. You run 10 men and you have learned that 10 men is the most complete education in human nature that exists. You have been a corporal for 8 months, a lance corporal for 3 before that, a private for 7 before that. You have been in France for over a year and a half. The private who joined last week calls you an old hand because of what sits behind your eyes and not what is on your face. Your section is your world in the most literal sense. You know every weak board in the duck walk, every sandbag that will fail first in rain, every angle from the fire step. You know which direction the wind comes from before a gas attack because it has come from that direction before and you are paying attention. That is why all 10 of your men are still breathing. The lieutenant commanding your platoon is 19 years old. He was commissioned 8 weeks ago. He knows less than you and outranks you considerably. He is not a poor officer. He asks questions instead of pretending. You have known officers who didn't. Some of them are buried not far from here. This morning, one of your men has not eaten in 2 days. Something has gone quiet and wrong in him, the way things sometimes go quiet and wrong out here. Without announcement, without a clear moment you can point to. You take him into the traverse and talk to him. Not about the war, about his village, about the market on Saturdays, about the dog he mentioned once in passing 3 months ago. He talks for 10 minutes. By the end, he has eaten most of his ration. This is also your job. Nobody gave you a manual for it. At 2 in the afternoon, orders for a carrying party. Rations and ammunition forward to the forward sap at 7. You take 2 men. Heavy, wet, cold. Back by 9. History will remember the officers who planned the operations. It will not remember that you went back for one of your men when he went down in the mud in the dark, and that if you hadn't, that would have been the end of him. You remember it. 2 stripes, 10 men. The section holds. Sergeant, the spine of the platoon. The officer commands the platoon. You run it. That is not bitterness. That is simply the architecture of how things work at the front, and every man who has been here longer than a month understands it instinctively. The lieutenant issues the orders. You make sure those orders are executable, correctly understood, and actually carried out. You are the difference between a plan and a result. Your platoon stands at 34 men across 4 sections, below the established strength of around 48, which is where most platoons sit after months in the line. You know all of them. Which ones hold under sustained fire, and which ones need someone physically near them when a particular kind of shell starts falling. Who writes home every week and who has stopped. Was stopping writing home is not about having nothing to say. It is about something else entirely, and that something else is yours to catch before it becomes something the officer has to manage. You were made up 11 months ago after the previous sergeant did not come back from the September push. Someone had to do the job. The company sergeant major chose you because you were already doing it unofficially. You think about the previous sergeant sometimes, but not during working hours. This week, orders have come for a trench raid on the 17th. One officer, 12 men, 2 Lewis gunners for flank protection, 2 engineers from the Royal Engineers to handle a fortified enemy position. You are responsible for the preparation. You plan it in your head before you touch the map. Walking through it from the start to the last man back inside the wire, finding every point where it could fail, working backwards from each failure to what needs to be different. You have been on 4 raids. The difference between one that succeeds and one that becomes a catastrophe is almost never the fighting. It is timing, communication, and what happens in the 30 seconds when nothing goes according to plan. In the evening, you move through the trench. Equipment, drainage, ammunition. One of the newer men asks quietly if he will be on the raid. When you tell him no, he looks relieved and then ashamed of the relief. You put a hand briefly on his shoulder and say nothing. Nothing is exactly right. He will be on enough raids. There is no hurry. 3 stripes, 34 men. The platoon is ready. Like and subscribe for more amazing stories like this. Company Sergeant Major, the Iron Centre. You are the most important non-commissioned officer in the British Army. Not by rank, by function. The Company Sergeant Major exists at the intersection of every decision a company makes. Officers above you issue orders they believe to be executable. Sergeants below you manage the reality of execution. You sit between both, translating in both directions, absorbing the gap between what is planned and what is actually possible in a flooded trench at 3 a.m. A British rifle company at full establishment is 227 men. You have not seen full establishment since the summer. Right now, you have 131. The reinforcements who arrived last week have been through basic training and nothing else. They hold their rifles correctly. They do not yet know how to stay alive in a trench, which no depot teaches because it cannot be taught anywhere except here. You have been in the army for 12 years, a regular soldier before the war. You have a frame of reference the officers you serve under mostly do not. You know what the battalion looked like in 1913. You know what it looks like now. The distance between those two things is something you carry quietly, like a stone you have long since stopped trying to put down. Your day begins before anyone else's. By the time the officers reach stand to, you have already identified the drainage failure in B Section's bay, resolved a dispute over ration allocation that would have become a disciplinary matter by afternoon, and confirmed that last night's ammunition carry reached the correct position. None of it announced. Simply done. This morning, there is something more serious. A man in 3 platoon has not spoken in 4 days. Not silence from exhaustion. A different kind of silence. His corporal missed it. His sergeant noticed it yesterday and is unsure how to proceed. You have seen this before. You know where it ends if nobody acts. You are not going to let it end that way. You go to the captain. You lay it out plainly. He tells you to handle it. You already have a plan before you leave his dugout. There are no dispatches written about what you do. No battle is named after a company sergeant major. The company survives because of what you do before anyone notices it needed doing. Second Lieutenant, the weight of the whistle. You are 21 years old and you are responsible for 34 men's lives. You have been at the front for 7 weeks. Before that, 3 months at an officer cadet battalion, the accelerated wartime program, because the pre-war officer corps was already gone by the time you applied. It taught you tactics, map reading, how to write a field message, how to address a brigadier. It taught you nothing about what a trench looks like at 4 a.m. when a man in your platoon is quietly falling apart, and you have to decide in the next 60 seconds whether to report it or handle it yourself. Your platoon sergeant has been here 14 months. You understood his value by the end of your first week. By day 10, you had stopped framing your questions as statements and simply asked him directly. This was not weakness. This was the most important decision you have made in France. Tonight, there is a trench raid. 12 men, 2 engineers, 1 officer. You are the officer. which means you go over the wire first. At 10 o'clock, you go over. No Man's Land is nothing like what you imagined from the maps. It is slower than you expected and louder inside your own head. The wire catches on your uniform in two places the rehearsal did not account for. You reach the enemy wire. The engineers cut it in 8 seconds. You go in. The raid takes 17 minutes. The fortified position was in the 4th bay, not the 3rd. The kind of discrepancy no briefing document ever contains, and which you now understand is simply the nature of this work. You adapt. A prisoner is taken. The position is destroyed. 2 men are wounded. None are killed. You are back inside your own wire by 10:20. You write the after-action report by candlelight, your hand still unsteady from the adrenaline leaving your body. You note the extra 2 minutes, the 2 wounded, the bay discrepancy. You do not write about the moment when everything depended on the next 4 seconds and you chose correctly. Your sergeant looks at the report when you finish. He says nothing except that it is well written. You discover that is enough. Lieutenant, the man who has survived, long enough. You are 24 years old and you are old. 16 months at the front will do that. Not in your face. In the way you process information, the way you listen to an artillery barrage and automatically calculate trajectory and likely target without deciding to. The body learns the war whether you ask it to or not. You were promoted to lieutenant 9 months ago after the company commander watched you manage a crisis in a flooded communication trench in April. 3 men trapped, rising water, 1 exit blocked by a collapsed revetment. You got all 3 out in 11 minutes using 2 entrenching tools and a ground sheet as a brace. He said nothing at the time. A week later, your promotion came through. You serve now as company second in command. Duty rosters, equipment returns, casualty reports, supply requisitions. The constant paperwork that a 200-man company generates every single day. You go forward when the situation requires an officer and the captain is not available. Otherwise, you keep the company running from behind the front line. What 16 months teaches you is that the war is almost entirely an administrative problem. The part that appears in newspapers, the assaults, the advances, the acts of individual courage, that is the visible surface of something constructed almost entirely from logistics, maintenance, and paperwork. An army moves forward because someone ensured the shells were at the correct dump, the rations reached the right trench, the casualty evacuation route was actually clear. You have become that person. You do not mind. You also carry something the newer officers are only beginning to acquire. Not skill. Weight. The names on the casualty lists are not names to you. They are specific faces, particular voices, the exact way certain men looked in the moment before doing something difficult. The lieutenant from D Company commissioned the same month as you, gone in October from a shell that landed 30 feet from where he was standing for no reason that any map or plan could have predicted or prevented. You do not share this with the newer officers. It is not transferable. They will carry their own version in time because they are here, and being here is how it happens. Tonight is quiet. You walk the platoon lines before last light, check the sentries, stop and talk where it helps. Then the dugout. Reports. 4 hours of sleep. Every man in this company exists in a document you have touched. That is not nothing. Captain, the man who commands. 227 men at full establishment. 227 lives, each with a history, a particular way of being in the world that exists nowhere else, and which can end at any moment from a piece of metal moving faster than sound. You are 26 years old. You have commanded this company for 9 months. You took over when the previous commander was evacuated with enteric fever in the spring and were confirmed in post 6 weeks later. You command from a dugout 8 feet underground, 12 feet long, propped with salvaged timber, lit by 2 oil lamps that produce more smoke than light. On the table, maps annotated in 3 different pencils, 5 reports waiting for your signature, a battalion message received an hour ago, and a mug of tea that has been cold for 40 minutes because you have not had time to drink it. Your company sergeant major is the most valuable professional relationship of your life. You would not say that aloud. He knows things before you know them. He solves problems before they reach your desk. He moves between the world of officers and the world of men with a fluency that cannot be taught or appointed and which you rely on completely. This morning at battalion orders, the operation on the 23rd was confirmed. A company-level assault. 90-minute artillery preparation. Your company leading the first wave. You listened to the entire briefing without expression. Internally, you were running the calculation simultaneously. Approach routes, wire condition, known machine gun positions, the state of your most recently reinforced platoon, the communication plan, and what happens when the communication plan fails, or because it will fail. It always does. You asked 3 questions. All 3 were about the flanks. Walking back alone through the communication trench, you allow yourself 30 seconds to think about what the 23rd might mean in terms of losses. 30 seconds. You have learned to time it precisely. Longer than that serves nothing. Maximum preparation. Near zero certainty. Responsibility for everything. Control of almost nothing. You drink the cold tea. You pick up the first report. You carry on. Lieutenant Colonel, the man who sees the whole line. You command the battalion. 1,007 men at full establishment. This morning in the autumn of 1916, you have 612. You are 32 years old. Before the war, that would have been considered remarkably young for this command. It is not considered remarkable now. You were a major in the summer of 1914. You are not the officer who was originally intended to command this battalion. You are the officer who was still standing when the time came. Your headquarters sits 350 meters behind the front line, close enough to hear every artillery exchange, far enough that a routine shell is unlikely to find you on a quiet day. You have walked the forward trench 3 times this week. Each time, your presence changed the atmosphere of every section you pass through. The battalion commander walking the line carries meaning, and the men have learned over months to read your face for what that meaning is. You have learned to give them something worth reading. Your work is translation. Brigade hands you an objective, a timeline, a set of resources, and a list of constraints. You distribute that across 4 companies, coordinate the artillery support, the machine gun sections, the trench mortar teams, and build in the contingencies that the brigade plan does not contain. Because brigade plans are written by men who are not standing in this trench and whose maps do not show what the ground actually looks like after 8 weeks of shelling. You trust your company commanders. 2 of them completely. 1 you watch carefully in certain conditions. You have learned over months to distinguish between a man who is tired, a man who is approaching his limit, and a man who has passed it. Those distinctions matter more at this level than almost any tactical consideration. The operation on the 23rd came from division through brigade. You have concerns about the eastern approach and the state of the wire your patrols reported last Tuesday. You sent a formal note to brigade raising both points. You expect to be told to proceed on the original plan. You will proceed on the original plan, and you will have addressed every concern you can address within your own authority before 0 hour. The night before the 23rd, you visit the forward aid post. You speak with the medical officer about stretcher bearer teams, casualty relay points, whether the main communication trench to the rear is passable under fire. He answers every question directly. Before you leave, he says, "We are ready, sir." You tell him you believe him, because being believed is what he needs from you in this moment, and it costs you nothing to give it. And leadership at this level is partly the work itself, and partly the signal you send about the work. 612 men. The 23rd is coming. The line will hold.